All right, so um, let's take a look. We're going to be starting with chapter 35, which is on page 211 if you have the Eitz Chaim. 35, page 211, and I just looked at myself to see that my keypad's not on. So now it is, and now I can really start. So what we saw last time really was this horrific story of Dinah, rather, Jacob's daughter being taken captive and raped by Shem, who holds on to her and attempts to negotiate. His father attempts to negotiate for her to marry him. Uh, and then we saw Shimon and Levi take their revenge and capture her. And it's important, I think, just to remember that story uh, and its possible consequences as we move on. Um, so you remember the last thing we read, and you'll see that on page 211. At the very end of chapter 34, we have this encounter, really confrontation between Jacob and Shimon and Levi, where Jacob says, "You brought trouble on me, making me odious among the inhabitants of the land. My men are few in number, so if they unite against me and attack me, I and my house will be destroyed." And then the last word goes to Shimon and Levi, who say, "Should our daughter be treated like a..." That's where we're left up. But Jacob's concern is that this will rile up the other inhabitants of the land, that he will not be safe. And it's important to think about that as we move ahead. So we're on page, again, 211, chapter 35. And God says to Jacob, Kum ale Beit El, get up and go to Beit El, Beth El in the English translation. And it doesn't say get up and go. I'm sorry, it doesn't say go. It says go up. And I think that's significant because where he is going is, in fact, about 1,000 feet higher than where he is. Beit El is a higher place, and it's probably one of the reasons why it had been a cultic site in antiquity, not just for the Israelites, as Jacob has made it an Israelite cultic site, but also for the Canaanites. Uh, and you remember that Beit El is the place where Jacob's journey had started. It was there that he awoke. He had a dream of the ladder that went up and down with the angels on it. He awoke and he said, "This place is awesome. It's none other than Beit El. It's God's house. Shar Hashamayim, the gate of heaven." And then he makes that vow to God, that if God will indeed be with him and provide him with clothing and food and protect him, that he will dedicate this spot when he comes back. So God here is telling Jacob to go there. And one has a sense that Jacob, having made a vow, God is asking for the fulfillment of that vow. And God says, "Build an altar there who to the God that appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau." Very clear. That's the place. And so Jacob and his household and all that were with him. And then it says, "Rid yourself of the alien gods in your midst, purify yourself, change your clothing. Let us go to Beit El." So he's telling his household to get rid of all of their idols. And it's not, the question is, well, where did those idols come from? And certainly we had that story about Rachel and the teraphim, these household gods that she had taken. But this seems perhaps broader than that. And remember, this is immediately in the context of the destruction of Shechem and the plundering of Shechem. And so it's reasonable to assume that part of that plunder was the taking of these idols. And in fact, it goes on to say in verse 4, they gave Jacob all of the alien gods that they had and the rings that were in their ears, and Jacob buried them. So you might wonder what it is about their earrings. And one thing we've learned from archaeology is that where they've discovered earrings from ancient Mesopotamia around this time, and very often on their earrings, they had symbols of their gods. So the reference here is not only the little statuettes themselves, but also anything that had. And this is the first request to rid themselves of these items. And you might wonder why here, in the context of going to Bet Ayl, would Jacob tell them to get rid of all of this? Well, in order to understand that, you have to remember back to the beginning of Vayetze, where Jacob did come to this place. And one of the vows that Jacob makes is, you will be my God. Right? Remember, if you will be with me and protect me and clothe me, then you will be my God. And here we have a sense that what that means is exclusively. What we have here is not a kind of monotheism which rejects other gods entirely, right? Saying that there is only one God. We do come to that in the biblical narrative, and it's most strongly seen in the book of Deuteronomy. But here, that's not the request, or that's not the understanding. It's simply that God, becomes the God of Israel, that will be exclusively the God of the Israelite people. And we see something similar at Mount Sinai later on in the Ten Commandments. And you shall have no other, I am the Lord your God, you will have no other gods before me. So that idea begins here. This is at least the first time we see it. Now, we have a lot of midrashim, later texts, which refer back to this period. And you know the famous midrash, I think I've mentioned it before. In fact, I'm sure of it, that Abraham's father was an idolater, and Abraham destroyed, the original iconoclast who destroyed the icons. But it's not clear that that's the view, really, in the biblical text. But these other gods are not the gods of Jacob and not the gods of his clan, and they are to get rid of them. Now, he not only says get rid of them, he says purify yourselves and change your clothes. This idea of changing clothing, right? You're shedding everything that came in the past. The story of Dinah is a story of uncleanliness, and they've been in contact with blood and war and all of those things, and now they have to cleanse themselves. And this idea of cleansing yourself and preparing, ritually cleansing yourself, we will also see at Mount Sinai. There, 3 days before the revelation at Mount Sinai, the people are told to purify themselves and to prepare for the revelation. So then he says, come, let us go up to Bet Ayl, and I will build an altar there to the God who answered me when I was in distress and who has been with me wherever I have gone. Right? So Jacob here acknowledging that God had fulfilled God's part of this vow, and now Jacob needs to go and fulfill his. And they gave Jacob all the alien gods they had and the rings that were in their ears, and he buried them under the terebinth that was near Shechem. It's noteworthy that he doesn't destroy them, which in later Israelite history is what would be done. There's a suggestion, one of the commentators suggests that this will not become an Israelite site of worship. And therefore, it's almost being defiled here. I don't know that I buy that, but it is striking that he buries them rather than destroys them. As they set out, a terror from God fell on the cities round about, and they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. Now, I think this, again, we really have to think back to the story of the rape of Dinah and remember Jacob's fear that he would be odious among the people, and he's not big in number. And so here we see that that concern really is not a concern. Now, it's not clear exactly how we understand the words a terror from God. If you look at the Hebrew, it says, Chitat Elohim al ha'arim asher svivotehem. So there was a Elohim. You remember the word Elohim, and we've talked about this before too. Elohim could mean God, or it could simply mean a powerful, right? Like in the very beginning of Genesis, where we saw Ruach Elohim mirahefet al pnei hatahom, either a wind from God was hovering over the waters, that was before God says, let there be light, or it could mean a great wind. This could mean simply a great terror rather than some divine intervention. And given the way that the Israelites had acted in Shechem under Dinah, because of Dinah, you can imagine that other peoples might simply have been afraid of them. Either it was God's protection or it was their reputation. It doesn't really matter. But they don't pursue him. He comes to Luz, that is Bet Ayl, in the land of Canaan, he and all the people who were with him, and he built an altar, and he named the site El Bet Ayl, for it was there that God had revealed God's self to him when he was fleeing from his brother. All right, so here it's being given this name officially. El Bet Ayl also means the God of the house of God. It is thereafter simply called Bet Ayl. And then we get in the middle of this, we get this statement, which is really quite surprising. Devorah, Rebecca's nurse, died, was buried under an oak below Bet Ayl, and it was named Alon Bakot. So Alon Bakot means the oak of crying or weeping, right? The Hebrew word bocheh is to cry or to weep. And so this name, one has a sense that it's associated with mourning. Now, why this is mentioned at all is surprising. She's not a major character. We only know that when she left her father's house, when Rebecca left her father's house to go and ultimately to marry Isaac, she goes with her nurse. Here she's mentioned again, and it may be that there were lots of other ancient traditions about her about Devorah that simply didn't exist, weren't carried on, didn't make it into the official record, which is the book of Genesis. Um, it is surprising. She is the last figure now that connects them back to the birthplace, to her mother's house, to Rebecca's house. So we're beginning to see a break here, and we're going to see it even more clearly in a minute. And now God appears to Jacob, and he blesses him. And God says, and here we get a repetition of what the angel who struggled with Jacob asked him for a blessing, and this was the blessing. You whose name is Jacob, you will no longer be called Jacob, but Israel will be your name, right? And so we get this sense now, not of the angel who is forced, right? He wants to be let go, and Jacob says, I won't let you go. It's coming morning. The angel needs to get out of town before daybreak, and Jacob wrests that name from the angel. But here it's being bestowed by God as part of this blessing. And this takes place in the land of Israel. Remember that his wrestling with the angel took place outside the land just before Jacob was going to cross over into the land. And so this blessing delivered to him directly by God, without any coercion, and in the land of Israel. And he not only gives him a new name, but he says, I am El Shaddai, right? A name that we've seen before. Be fruitful and increase, right? Telling him this is the language, of course, of Genesis, that language of blessing to Adam. But here, I think it's also tied, of course, to God's blessing to Abraham, that his descendants will be like the stars in the sky and the sands of the sea. A nation, an assembly of nations shall descend from you. Kings will issue from your loins. The land that I assigned to Abraham and Isaac, I assign to you and to your offspring to come, will I assign this land. Right? So we get this reiteration of the covenant. Very clearly, this is the blessing. And this is also, remember that Jacob earned a blessing, his father's deathbed blessing, by deceit. But he's no longer Jacob, and Jacob is the deceiver, the one who sought to supplant his brother. He's now being given a freely offered blessing, which is that this land, which was part of that blessing, this land will be his land and that of his descendants. The vision is now over. God parts from him at the spot where he had spoken to him. Jacob sets up a pillar of stone. He offers a libation on it, pouring water on it, and he gave it the name Bet Ayl. And that is the end of that story. We're going to go on in a minute. I just want to open things up if there are questions. Any questions at all? Okay, so Sandy.
The earrings, is there any connection, with the earrings being with slaves? Remember when they put
Yeah, so right. So a slave is supposed to be freed in the seventh year, and if the slave refuses to be freed and wishes to stay, their ear is pierced. I see the connection, but I don't think there's any real significance to it.
Okay.
We see earrings elsewhere. We see them as part of what the people contribute to Aaron to make the golden calf. So they certainly have a pagan association. It's striking that also Rebecca is given a nose ring. I don't know if there were also earrings by Abraham's servant, but here I think it's really quite specific, and it coupled with the idea in the same verse with the idea of putting away your idols.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions, Barry? Unmute.
Just an observation. When Jacob is negotiating with Shechem,
Yeah,
the negotiation is about the circumcision, not about giving up idols.
yes.
No. So now it could be that the circumcision was a ruse to
Yes.
disable the.
Well, yes. So first of all, it's Shimon and Levi. It's not Jacob himself, right, who negotiate. And as you said, it's a ruse. It really doesn't have anything to do with idolatry. It's simply a way of incapacitating them so that they can come in and exert their vengeance and save their sister. Saul.
Yeah, back in sentence 4, Vayitmon otam Yaakov tachat ha'ela asher in Shechem. He hid these Elahei Nachar, these gods. Why didn't he destroy them?
Yes, it's really not clear. And as I said, some commentaries think that this is deliberately to keep this from becoming a cultic site. And it's not a place where there's a temple later on, unlike other significant places. And it was previous to this, at least according to archaeologists, it had been a pagan site. So perhaps that's part of it, to make sure that no one is going to go. I mean, no one knows where they're buried. Right? You can't, and they didn't have metal detectors, right? So he's traced it up, as it were. Maybe that's part of it, but I don't know that that's the answer. It's surprising. Really is surprising. Other comments, Hannah?
Yeah, I understand Bet El is not Bethlehem at all, but I'm wondering where's Bethlehem, Bet El, where that would be now? What area of Israel would that be?
I don't know.
No. But
And
it's desert, somewhere in the desert.
I mean, it's a high place that we know. I'm just looking. The Age Time does have maps at the end of it. And one from the early biblical period, Israel and Canaan. I see Shem, Shiloh.
I was there. I went there.
You were in
Rabbi, I just looked it up. It's according to one of the AI an AI overview in the hill country of Samaria, roughly 10 miles north of Jerusalem, identified with the modern village of Beitin or Bet Ayl.
Okay.
Rabbi, I was there. It's in the West Bank. I was there. There's a sign, and it says Bet Ayl, site of Jacob's dream.
Okay, so
I'll send you the picture, Hannah.
no, you don't have to send me the picture. The only caution I would make about this is that we don't really know. We don't have continuous historical records, and there was a tendency to try to identify places with places in antiquity. You see it, for example, although this is much later, under Catherine. This is, which is during the period of Christianity. She identifies a place as Mount Sinai, right? Somehow the Holy Spirit has come to her and told her this is where Sinai was, and which is really, there's a bush there, which she identified as being the burning bush. So I'm not, I think that there are very few places where we can say with any assurance that this place is really that place that is mentioned. One of them is probably the tomb of the Machpelah, because it was a consistent reference to that place for thousands of years. And the other one we're about to come to, which is Rachel, the burial place of Rachel. Other than that, was this biblical Bet Ayl? Maybe, possibly. I wouldn't say certainly. Okay, any other comments? If not, onward. Okay, let's look then, starting with, they set out from Bet Ayl when they were still some distance from Ephrat. Rachel was in childbirth. She had hard labor. And when it was at its worst, the midwife said to her, "Don't be afraid, it is another boy." This is a reference back to when Joseph was born and her first child, her only other child. And she says, she expresses the wish that God will grant her another son. And here we see the fulfillment of that wish. Unfortunately, she pays the price for it. As she breathes her last, for she was dying, she named him Ben Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. Now, the meaning of Ben Oni is unclear. It could mean the son of my strength, or it could mean the son of my sorrow. So there's a certain ambiguity there. It's unclear what she means, but it seems to have a negative association for Jacob because he gives this child his own name. Now, I should say, we don't know whether Jacob knew the name that Rachel had given the child, because she's dying. Did he hear it? Did he not like that name? Did he therefore give another name? In the past, when the matriarchs gave names, they stuck. Or maybe it's simply such a painful connection to the death of his beloved wife that he changes the name. So what does Benjamin mean? And there are three possibilities. Yamin means right. That is the right hand, the son of my right hand. That could mean the favored son, right? Because, and if anyone is left-handed, I apologize, but in general, in the Bible, the right hand, we talk about God's right hand as being mighty, for example. The right hand is assumed to be dominant, even though in left-handed people it isn't. And therefore, this idea of the favored son. Another possibility is Yamin is also a direction. It's south. So it could mean my son from the south is born in the south, will be where, he will settle in the south, very unclear. The third explanation, which I like a lot, is it's not from Yamin, meaning north, south rather, or even preferred, but it's from the word yom, that is day. So the son of my days, meaning old age. And that idea we've seen elsewhere, the child that is born in one's old age, who does become the favorite. This is Jacob's last child. It is born in his old age. And in fact, if you just look ahead to Vayeshev, we see, and this is chapter 37 rather, in verse 3, it says, Israel loved Joseph best of all his sons. Why? Because he was the child of his old age. And so there it's specifically Ben Zikunim from Zakain, meaning old. But here it could mean, there's an expression, Bab Yamim, it come into days, which is used elsewhere for being elderly. So maybe it means that. I think it's clever. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But the end of the issue is that's his name. He is Benjamin, or Benjamin in English. And then we get the statement, and Rachel died, and she was buried on the road to Ephrat, now Bethlehem. And over her grave, Jacob set up a pillar, the pillar at Rachel's grave, to this day. And that statement, to this day, whenever this comes to us, indicates that it was there, that it was marked. And this really is the other place that we know of that we have a very, very reliable tradition, an ancient tradition of this spot. I wanted to read you something. This is from the Jewish Publication Society's commentary on the book of Genesis, which is really an excellent commentary. And I just want to read this because it's sort of comprehensive. The text tells of the death and burial of Rachel and of a stone marker set over her grave. It is clear from 1 Samuel 10:2 that in the time of Samuel, the tomb of Rachel was a famous landmark. The traditional site, presumably so called, lays about 4 miles south of Jerusalem, 1 mile north of Bethlehem. It is repeatedly described in Christian, Jewish, and Muslim sources since the 4th century. Through the ages, it has served as a place for pilgrimage for Jews on new moons, during the month of Elul, on the 14th of Mar Cheshvan, which is the traditional anniversary of Rachel's death. The present small square-shaped dome structure, which was featured on the pictorial stamp issued for Palestine by the British government between 1927 and 48, is relatively modern, that tomb that you see. In 1841, the tomb was renovated through the generosity of Sir Moses Montefiore, and in 1948, it was taken over by Jordanian invaders. Jews were excluded from it. The area was converted into a Muslim cemetery, and then it was liberated by Israel in 1967. So there you have the history of that place. I would also tell you that as an icon, the image of Rachel's tomb became very important. And you see it in art going all the way back to antiquity. It's one of those things that, like the shofar, like the lulav, that comes up again and again. It seems to have been a very, very important site. The idea that Rachel would be an intercessor for the Jewish people, that one can go there, women go there before giving birth to this day, and ask for Rachel's blessing on them. It was associated with the new moon because the new moon is associated with women. and is in fact, in earlier times, that is Talmudic times, it's viewed as a special holiday for women, a day on which women did not work. So for a variety of reasons, this place becomes extremely important as a site in the land of Israel. And Jacob marks it and then goes on to Migdal Eder. And Migdal Eder literally means a Migdal is a pillar, a tower, and Eder is flocks. So it's an agricultural place. And now we get one of the strangest passages in the Torah, right? Just the slightest little mention. When Israel was in the land, and now he's being referred to as Israel, no longer Jacob, although it will switch back and forth, Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel, that is Jacob, found out. It's a very strange story. What is it about? Why are we told it? And why are we told that he found out? It is not, there isn't a sense here that he, wanted her, fell in love with her, something like that. We do have cases like that, but this doesn't seem to be one of them. So why would he do this? And there are a couple of theories. One is that it is he sleeping with, and we see this specifically later on in the story of David. David's son, Absalom, wants to be his successor. And he goes and he takes one of his father's wives and sleeps with her in order to assert that privilege, that one who sleeps with the concubine of the king gains that kind of power. Maybe. He is the firstborn, and maybe he wants to assert that privilege. So it's a kind of almost political act. The other possibility is that Bilhah was, of course, Rachel's concubine. And the theory is, and we see this in the Midrash, the theory is that he is afraid that, Reuven is afraid that his mother, Leah, will now be neglected by Jacob, and that Bilhah, who was his favorite wife's concubine, will now be elevated to the status of the favored wife, even though she's the concubine. By sleeping with her, he makes her sexually unavailable to Jacob. He in a sense, there's a sense of impurity about her. That you can't, and we see this in Leviticus, we see that a son can't sleep with his father's wives, and if there's a sense that then she, having done it, she cannot, the father cannot cohabit with her, just as he can't cohabit with a woman who had committed adultery, had been with some other woman. So, like much of what we're looking at today, we really have no idea. Why it's mentioned in the Torah, we don't really have a strong idea. But I do want to mention the narrator goes out of his, or possibly her, we don't know, we really don't know, to say, and there have been theories about that, but to say that Israel, that is Jacob, learned of it. Now, what's surprising is he didn't do anything. You would expect he learned about it and he said something. He responded. He did something. We finally see that he didn't forget about it. If you go to the very end of Genesis, when Jacob is blessing his children, and we mentioned this last time with respect to Simon, Shimon, and Levi, where he says, for when they were angry, they slay men, cursed be their anger, and so on. And here, with respect to Reuven, he who is the oldest son, he says, Reuven, you are my firstborn, my might, the first of fruit of my vigor, exceeding in rank and honor. Unstable as water, you excel no more. For when you mounted your father's bed, you brought disgrace. My bed you mounted. So he's been holding on to this his whole life. But he doesn't do anything. And he doesn't do anything about Dinah either. It is Shimon and Levi who do something. If you look back to that story for a second, it says she had been taken and so on. And Jacob heard, this was verse 6, Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter, that is Shechem, Dinah, but since his sons were in the field with his cattle, he kept silent. He doesn't respond. Here too, he doesn't respond. And we're going to see this another time as well. He seems somehow that encounter with the angel, perhaps, where he comes away with a limp. This was Jacob, the trickster, always looking for advantage. And now he's become extremely passive. So one could suggest maybe reasons, but essentially it is what it is. He has these feelings, but he doesn't act on them. He seems to just want peace, quiet, even to the extent of not challenging his son when he sleeps with his concubine. Okay, so going on. Just get back to the page, which I should have saved. Okay, so now we get a reference, and we're at verse, the end of 22, and we get a recounting of the names of the sons. Jacob's sons were 12 in number. The sons of Leah, Reuven, Jacob's firstborn, Shimon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel, Joseph, and Benjamin. And so here we have, this is a summing up. Now Benjamin, the last child, has been born. And then the sons of Bilhah, Dan and Naphtali, and the sons of Zilpah, Leah's maid, Gad and Asher. These are the sons of Jacob, born to him in Padam Aram. So here we have it. This will be, as we move into the book of Exodus, which is really just a continuation of the book of Genesis. And it's worth noting that for a variety of reasons. We see it as a separate book, but it's really not a separate book. And as a result, this list becomes an important list. Jacob comes to his father Isaac at Mamre, at Kiryat Arba, now Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had sojourned. Isaac was 180 years old when he breathed his last and died. He was gathered to his kin at a ripe old age, and he was buried by his sons Esau and Jacob. And so just as Isaac had come together with Ishmael to bury his father Abraham, their father Abraham, so we see the same thing as well. And now we're going to get, we were told about Jacob, we just told about Jacob's sons, and now we're going to have a long genealogy of Esau. This will be the end of our concerns about Esau. It is part of the idea that Abraham's descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the sky and so on, that kings will descend from them, and Esau is one of those descendants. We also saw this with Ishmael, where we had a genealogy of Ishmael. So here we get genealogy of Esau. He takes wives from among the Canaanite women. We get the names of the wives and the names of the children. Esau then takes wives, his sons and daughters, and all his property that he acquired in Canaan. And he went to another land because of Jacob, for their possessions were too many for them to dwell together, and the land where they sojourned could not support them. And he goes to Seir, which is also known as Edom. And then he has much more family there. And so this idea of separation we saw also back with Abraham and Lot, as you may remember, similar reason, there just wasn't enough land. And so Esau leaves the promised land. It's not his inheritance. And he goes to Edom, Seir, which becomes known as Edom because he was known as Edom. And then there is a history, of course, later on of the Israelites and the Edomites. And then we get the line of Esau, the ancestor of the Edomites in the hill country of Seir. We get the name of his sons, and they were born to him by other wives, and then we get also grandchildren and various clans. And as you can see, it goes on and on. And some of these names are familiar to us. Some of them actually are names that are used by the Israelites as well. But there's no reason to assume they were the same people. I'm just trying to think. There is one of the, so for example, if you look at chapter 36, verse 37, when Samlah died, Shaul of Rehoboth on the river succeeded him as king. So here's this King Saul here, but he's not the same King Saul that we know of as the first king of Israel. Right? One of these children is Amalek. The Amalekites come from him. The Amalekites, who will be in the book of Exodus, the great enemies of the Jewish people. And so you can see we come right up to, I'm not going to read through it. It's not particularly interesting. What's interesting only is that it's here. And it really, if you're in synagogue on the day that this is read, you're sitting there for quite a while. It's striking. And you saw that same thing with Ishmael. Right? They are, after all, Abraham's children. And so they get their due. All right. I'm going to open things up again for questions, if there are, starting with Sandy, and then Barry, and then anyone else.
So Jacob ran away from, he left his house to go to Laban. And there was a period of about 20 years, maybe, or so, that he was away from Isaac, his father, and his mother. And is there any evidence? Well, I have two things to say. One is, I don't see anything in the text where he tried to make, or there was any contact. I mean, we thought he died, at least I thought he died, but Isaac is still alive 20 years later. Was there any evidence that Jacob got in touch with Isaac?
No.
Okay.
So it's striking that he's still alive, right? And they're both in the land of Israel. So yeah, it's actually, I never thought about it, but it's striking. I don't know that I would read anything into it. The Bible does not tell us everything that happened.
Yeah. The thing is that I was thinking, well, later on, what happens with Joe? Measure for measure, he doesn't get in touch with his father. Jacob doesn't get in touch with Isaac, and for 22 years, Joseph doesn't get in touch with Jacob. So, sort of a sense of measure for measure, would you say?
Maybe. I mean, it certainly repeated this process of family separation. Maybe, I don't know.
And the other thing I want to mention is that when Jacob and Esau meet finally after 20 years or so, they don't mention, there's no mention of Isaac there either.
No. And remember that we also don't really have any mention of Rebecca and her death, which is really striking because we do learn about the death of her mate. Right? You would think that Rebecca's death would be noted, and it's not. So again, these things are like much in this section, unclear. A lot of time passes. Where they go, I mean, certainly, I was thinking about this today. It's a time of, they don't, there's no internet, right? I mean, they seem to find out, right? I mean, neither Jacob nor Esau, they're separated, right? I mean, they're not in the same place, and we don't know where Isaac is, but somehow the sons find out and they're able to go there and bury him. So I just, whether this is just the Torah's way of talking about a reconciliation, I just don't know. So.
Thank you.
No, okay. I thought, it was Barry.
Just I noticed in the verse 40 mentioned the chiefs descended from Esau.
Yes.
And one of them is Timnah. And my wife Tova has a cousin named Timnah, who's a female. Could this be a female chief?
Probably not here, because generally the women are not mentioned. So is she an Israeli?
Yes.
I mean, Israelis did pick up a lot of ancient names, and I don't know that they particularly cared whether they were Jewish characters or not. So yeah, I mean, and modern Israel is just all kinds of inventive names, and often things like valley, stream. Timnah also becomes important because it's a place of mining later on in the South Negev, and near Eilat, there are mines there, which were the mines of Timnah, going back all the way to the time of Solomon. Anything else? All right, well, we are going to stop here because I don't want to yet get into the story of Jacob, and we don't really have time to do much with it. So we're going to pick up next time with what is the longest narrative in the Torah. I mean, we're going to go really from chapter 37 all the way up to chapter 50. Even further, I think. No, chapter 50. So this is a good third of the book. And it will, though, as I mentioned earlier, Jacob will continue to be mentioned. The focus now is going to be on this remarkable story of Joseph. I don't know if you've ever seen or read any part of Thomas Mann's book about Joseph, but it's several volumes. It's really quite something. One volume's called Young Joseph, one's called Joseph in Egypt, but it's really an amazing kind of imaginative work, much like Midrash in some ways. And maybe he even knew some of that Midrash, I don't know. Okay, we'll pick up next week. Again, I want to remind you, as I said at the beginning, that we will not have classes just that week of Pesach. But we will be here next week, and I hope you'll be here next week as well. All right, take care, everybody.
Hi.
Thank you.
Have a
Thanks
good
very
day.
much, Paul.